When Sophia left, she did it with a smile so calm it sliced straight through the last fragile thread holding my soul together. People said I was lucky she had chosen someone richer, someone with more to offer, and that I should be grateful I'd been spared a lifetime with a woman who was so quick to trade love for comfort. But they didn't see the nights I spent hunched over the kitchen table, staring at the ring she tossed onto the counter before walking out, the diamond catching the last streaks of dying daylight as if mocking me for ever thinking it meant forever. I told no one about the letter I found the next day, how she wrote that she hoped I'd move on quickly, that I'd find someone more suited for me. She wrote it so neatly, so politely, as if our years together were nothing more than a small transaction she was gently wrapping up before heading off into the bright future she thought she deserved. I didn't cry then. My eyes burned, my chest split open with something raw and ugly, but I refused to let a single tear fall. That night, I packed a single bag, shut off the lights, and left the apartment we once called home without looking back. If Sophia wanted a storybook ending, she would get one, but I wouldn't be the tragic fool left standing in the ashes of what we built. I left quietly, without telling anyone where I was going. The next day, they held a party for her engagement, her parents gushing about how fast she was moving on, how blessed she was to find someone else so soon. But even as the applause rang out for her new life, I was already boarding a plane with Deborah by my side, her soft hand clutching mine so tightly, I thought I might fall apart from the tenderness of it. Everyone expected me to break, everyone expected me to beg, but instead, I disappeared into a new horizon, carrying only the bitter lessons Sophia carved into my bones, and the fragile hope that maybe, someday, I'd learn to trust the light in someone else's eyes again. Welcome to Story Heaven, where every betrayal turns into silent revenge and leaves you wanting more. Watch the story till the end and let us know in the comments how you felt about it and what kind of stories you want to see in the future. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Your support means the world to us. John met Sophia in college, long before the word love had begun to corrode itself into something bitter on his tongue. He was a quiet boy back then, the type who sat in the corner of every lecture hall scribbling down notes with precise, narrow handwriting, his glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose as he tried to remain invisible. Sophia was anything but invisible. She was sunlight in motion, laughter that broke through the stillness of dusty classrooms, bright scarves flaring around her neck as she breezed from one room to the next, trailed by friends and admirers who hung on her every word. They met on a rainy afternoon, when Sophia ducked into the library to escape a sudden downpour and nearly knocked over the stack of books John had been balancing in his arms. She apologized with a hurried laugh, brushing wet strands of hair from her forehead, her smile so bright it nearly blinded him. He had mumbled something, he didn't even remember what, and picked up his books without looking at her. But before she left, she leaned close, and in a voice soft enough to make his pulse flutter, whispered, "You look like you carry the whole world on your shoulders. Maybe let someone else hold some of it for you someday, okay?" John didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the light in her eyes, the warmth of her voice. He told himself it was foolish, that a woman like her would never look twice at a man like him. But he couldn't stop the tiny sprout of hope that took root in his chest that night, a hope that grew stronger every time their paths crossed. Sophia, for her part, seemed to take an immediate liking to him. She teased him gently in the hallways, called his name brightly across crowded quads, slipped him coffee during late-night study sessions without asking if he wanted it. And slowly, John began to soften. He started to look forward to seeing her, began to memorize the patterns of her footsteps, the shape of her laughter, the way her voice dipped into something low and secretive when she leaned close. By the end of sophomore year, they were inseparable. Everyone said they were perfect together, the quiet, studious boy and the vibrant, fearless girl who seemed to light up every room she entered. John fell hard, fell with everything he had, his heart laid bare and trembling. He thought he'd never love anyone else. He thought Sophia was the ending and the beginning of every story he would ever tell. Their relationship was a strange thing, built on tenderness, yes, but also on imbalance. Sophia was the sun, the center of every orbit, while John was content to be her quiet satellite, following wherever she led. He didn't notice the small cracks at first, the way she sometimes brushed aside his concerns, the way she dismissed his fears with a casual wave of her hand. He told himself this was normal, that Sophia was just a free spirit, that he was lucky to be loved by someone so brilliant, so radiant. But beneath the glow of her charm, John often felt small. He buried it, swallowed the ache, told himself love was sacrifice, that love meant giving up piece of yourself so the other could shine brighter. He built their life around her dreams, her ambitions, her endless hunger for more success, more praise, more excitement. When they graduated, Sophia was already fielding offers from high-end firms in the city, while John quietly accepted a stable, modest position at a local tech company. He didn't mind. He told himself he would build a home for them, a safe place she could return to when the world grew too loud. He saved every spare cent, packed lunches for her meetings, watched from the shadows as she climbed higher and higher. Sophia loved the attention. She bloomed under it. Every party, every social gathering, she was the center of the storm, eyes sparkling as she spun stories that had strangers eating out of her hand. John stood beside her in silence, offering a small smile when prompted, holding her purse, fetching her drinks, always careful not to disrupt the image she had curated so carefully. But late at night, when the lights dimmed and the makeup came off, Sophia would curl into his side and whisper her fears, her insecurities, her dreams. Those were the moments John lived for, the quiet spaces between her performance and the raw, trembling truth of the woman he loved. He memorized every breath, every tear, holding them close like sacred relics, proof that he mattered, that he was needed, even if only in the dark. Their engagement was inevitable, driven by her parents' expectations and the steady march of time. John proposed in their tiny apartment on a rainy evening that mirrored the day they met. Sophia said yes with a laugh, kissed him on the cheek, and immediately started making phone calls to plan the wedding. John never told her how his hands had been shaking so hard he could barely hold the ring box steady, never told her how his heart had nearly burst from the terror of losing her. They married in spring, under a white canopy draped in flowers. Sophia looked radiant, her smile blinding in the sun. John thought he might die from the ache in his chest, from the desperate hope that this was the beginning of forever. But as they stood hand in hand, reciting vows that felt brittle and hollow, he caught the quick flicker in her eyes, a flicker that would haunt him for years to come. She was restless, hungry, always searching for something he couldn't quite name. John tried to keep up. He worked harder, stayed late at the office, picked up extra shifts to afford the life Sophia wanted. He showered her with small gifts, learned to cook her favorite meals, swallowed his jealousy when she stayed out late at industry events surrounded by charming, powerful men. He told himself this was love, that this was what a good husband did. But in the quiet hours of the night, as Sophia slept beside him, John often lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had somehow already lost her. Wondering if love was enough to hold someone who was always looking for the next bright horizon. Then there was Deborah. She was the opposite of Sophia in every way. Quiet, gentle, a childhood friend who had reappeared in his life like a balm on old wounds. They met by chance one morning at a coffee shop near his office. Deborah had been standing in line ahead of him, her hair pulled into a messy bun, clutching a stack of papers so high she nearly dropped them when the barista called her name. John caught them out of instinct, their eyes meeting for a brief, breathless moment. She remembered him instantly, how he used to help her with math homework in high school, how he had once lent her his jacket on a freezing winter morning. They talked for hours that day, catching up on lost years. Deborah was kind in a way Sophia had never been, listening without interruption, asking questions weighed. The genuine curiosity. She never tried to dazzle anyone, never needed to be the brightest flame in the room. At first, John kept their meetings secret from Sophia, not out of guilt, but out of something quieter, something he couldn't quite name. Deborah was safe, soft, she made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. There was no hidden agenda, no subtle mocking, no sharp edges disguised as affection. Slowly, Deborah became the friend he leaned on, the voice he turned to in his darkest moments. She never tried to pull him away from Sophia, never pushed him to make choices he wasn't ready to face. She was simply there, a steady presence, a lighthouse in the fog. John never intended to fall in love with her, he never intended to build an escape route out of the ashes of his marriage. But when Sophia left, when she walked away so easily, so carelessly, into the arms of another man, Deborah was the only reason he didn't fall apart completely. And so when the time came, when the walls of their old life finally crumbled, John didn't beg, he didn't cling to the ruins. Instead, he took Deborah's hand, boarded a plane, and left behind the only home he'd ever known. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but it was also the first time he had ever chosen himself. John never saw it coming. In the months leading up to Sophia's departure, he clung stubbornly to the quiet routines that had defined their marriage: coffee in the mornings, brief phone calls in the afternoons, quiet dinners at night where she scrolled endlessly through her phone, pausing only to toss him a distracted smile. He didn't notice how her touch had become fleeting, how her kisses turned soft and quick as if they were checking off a box rather than filling a space between them. What he did notice, though he buried it deep, was the way she'd started dressing up more for late meetings, how she laughed louder on call. When she thought he wasn't listening, how she slipped out of the apartment earlier each morning, leaving only a lingering trace of perfume that clung to the hallway like an accusation. Then, one Friday evening, everything cracked open. John came home early, exhausted from back-to-back meetings and eager for the simple comfort of sitting quietly beside his wife. He was halfway through the door when he heard Sophia's voice, low and breathless, drifting from the kitchen. "I can't wait either. He doesn't suspect a thing. I'm just so tired of pretending. Soon, it'll be just us, I promise." A sharp, unfamiliar male laugh crackled through the phone speaker in response. John froze. His chest constricted so tightly it felt like his ribs might snap. He didn't make a sound, didn't interrupt, just stood there with his hand on the doorknob until Sophia's voice faded into silence. By the time she noticed him standing there, her expression flickered just once, surprise, then irritation, before she plastered on that bright, dismissive smile. "John? You're home early." He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. He watched as she hung up quickly, shoving her phone into her purse with careless grace. "Just talking to a friend," she lied easily, brushing past him to pour herself a glass of wine. He didn't question her, not directly. Instead, he spent the night awake beside her sleeping form, her soft breaths filling the dark, as 1,000 memories replayed in his mind. Every smile, every laugh, every night spent holding each other after long days, tainted now with the knowledge that somewhere in the spaces he couldn't see, Sophia had been giving herself to someone else. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. No note, no kiss goodbye. Only the faint trace of expensive perfume lingering on her pillow. John sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space she left behind, feeling something in him fracture so deep he wondered if he'd ever be able to piece it back together. He wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe there was an explanation for the hushed voice, the secretive smile. He clung to that hope like a drowning man, searching their apartment for proof that the life he'd built wasn't about to collapse. But every room felt emptier than the last. When he called her office, her secretary told him Sophia was out on business for the weekend. When he texted her, she replied hours later with a casual, busy, talk later XX. That was when John knew. Something inside him went quiet, a part of his heart folding in on itself. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty coffee cup she'd left behind that morning, the lipstick stain on the rim a silent, damning confession. He stayed there until Deborah called him that night, her gentle voice breaking through the numbness that had wrapped itself around his mind. She didn't pry when he answered in a whisper, didn't question the silence that stretched between them. She just stayed on the line, her breathing steady and warm, as if holding the frayed edges of his heart together with the sheer force of her presence. That weekend became a blur. Sophia didn't come home, she didn't call, she didn't answer the texts he sent, carefully worded, desperate in their restraint. Instead, late Sunday night, he saw it, a photo on social media, Sophia at a rooftop party, her smile wide and carefree as she leaned into the embrace of a tall man John had never seen before. He studied the photo for a long time, taking in every detail, the way her eyes sparkled, the way her hand rested possessively on the man's chest, the faint outline of the engagement ring he had given her years ago, still gleaming on her finger as if mocking him with the lie of commitment. And that was when he knew the truth. She had moved on. While he sat in the ruins of the life they built together, she had already begun building a new one, slipping so easily into someone else's arms it was as if he had never existed at all. That night, John closed every drawer, packed a single suitcase and turned off the lights one last time. He didn't leave a note, he didn't owe her that, he just walked out, swallowing the shards of what remained of his love, ready to bury it forever. John didn't think heartbreak would feel so quiet. In the first few days abroad, he barely slept. At night, he lay in the thin bed of the small rented apartment, staring at the ceiling as streetlights flickered through the curtains. Sometimes, he'd reach for the space beside him out of habit, expecting Sophia's soft hair brushing his shoulder, the delicate weight of her leg tangled with his. But the space was empty, cold, and he would curl into himself until dawn broke over the horizon in a pale wash of indifference. He didn't cry. There were no dramatic fits, no smashed furniture or howled curses to the night sky. Instead, he carried the ache with him like a stone lodged under his ribs, a constant pressure that kept him awake and raw. Deborah was the only thread holding him together. She checked in on him gently, never pushing, never demanding he share the ugly details, but he saw the worry in her eyes when he barely touched his food, the way her hands hovered near his shoulders when he looked too tired to stand upright. Sometimes, he would wake from half-dreams of Sophia's laugh, of her eyes locking on his with warmth that once felt like home, and he would nearly shatter from the knowledge that he'd been fooled so completely. That what he thought was love had been a fragile performance on her part, a show that ended the second she found a stage bright enough to match her hunger. In those sleepless hours, his mind would replay every moment, her distracted smile as he told her about his day, the way she pulled away when he reached for her hand in public, the careful neutrality in her voice when he tried to talk about the future. He saw it all now, the signs he had ignored because he'd wanted to believe so badly in the dream of them. And beneath the grief, a quiet ember of anger began to glow. He never told Deborah about the plan forming in the dark corners of his mind, the silent vow he made to himself as he scrolled through Sophia's social media, watching her parade her new life with sparkling champagne glasses and diamond earrings gifted by the man she left him for. He would never beg, never grovel, never show her the bloody wound she had carved into him. Instead, he began to build something quietly, methodically, stitching together connections through new jobs and local contacts, gathering skills and favors that he tucked away like weapons in the dark. Sophia wanted applause. She wanted bright lights and glittering crowds whispering about how quickly she had replaced him. John gave her that, at least on the surface. He never commented, never posted anything that suggested he even noticed what she was doing. He let the world think he was the quiet ex, the tragic figure wandering somewhere far away, broken and alone. But he wasn't broken, not completely. Late at night, he drafted quiet plans, learning new languages, saving every cent he could, expanding his network through slow, deliberate steps. In a new country, no one knew him as the man Sophia left. Here, he was just John, dependable, steady, soft-spoken, but unfailingly competent. And slowly, that new identity wrapped around him like armor. Sometimes, he'd see Sophia's face in dreams, smiling with that cold sweetness as she slipped away from him into someone else's arms, and he would jolt awake, hands trembling, breath ragged, but each time, the trembling lasted a little less, the pain dulling into something he could fold away, until it was just another scar he carried beneath his shirt. Deborah noticed the change, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she began sitting closer when they worked together in cramped office spaces, her soft shoulder brushing his as they typed quietly into the night. She would look at him with that gentle steadiness, her eyes patient, never asking him to be more than he could be at any given moment. In the silence, he started to heal. Not because he forgave Sophia, he wasn't sure he ever would, but because he refused to let her define what remained of his life. If love with Sophia had been a blinding sun burning away every part of him, then whatever he was building with Deborah was like the slow, steady rise of dawn, soft and persistent, warming him without scorching his skin. Still, every step forward carried a whisper of revenge. He wasn't planning to destroy Sophia, he wasn't that cruel. But he was determined that when she finally glanced back, if she ever did, she would see not the broken man she expected, but someone stronger, someone thriving, someone who had learned how to take the pain she left behind and forge it into steel. Someone who had become everything she never thought he could be, without needing her applause to prove it. Months later, just as John began to settle into the quiet rhythm of his new life, he received a call that sliced straight through the fragile peace he'd built. It was Sophia's mother. Her voice was shaking, raw with urgency. "John, please, she won't talk to me. I don't know who else to call. She's falling apart." He nearly hung up, his chest constricted with old hurt, instinct screaming to stay far, far away. But her mother's sobs held him frozen. Against every part of his better judgment, he asked quietly, "What happened?" She told him Sophia's glittering new relationship had shattered. The man she left John for, Marcus, a wealthy investor with a string of failed engagements, had suddenly vanished overseas, leaving behind a mountain of debt and rumors of affairs with other women. Sophia had gone to parties in bright dresses and diamond necklaces, playing the perfect new bride-to-be, only to find out he had been using her name to cover business deals that were now collapsing into scandal. Her carefully curated life was burning around her, and the so-called friends who once toasted her success had all vanished, eager to avoid the fallout. John felt nothing at first, just a slow, empty echo in his chest. He ended the call quickly, muttering empty reassurances, but that night, as he sat with Deborah going over some paperwork, the past slammed into him like a wave. He hadn't spoken to Sophia in months, hadn't even thought of her face except in hazy fragments of old nightmares. But now, memories he thought he'd buried bubbled up, acidic and raw, the way she had looked at him the day she walked out, all cold calm and calculated smiles. Deborah touched his arm gently, her brow furrowing in concern. "You look pale. Is everything okay?" John forced a smile. "I'm fine," he whispered, though he could feel something old and ugly twisting awake in the pit of his stomach. A week later, he came back from work to find Sophia standing on the street outside his new apartment. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, makeup smudged as though she'd been crying for hours. When he stepped out of the cab, she rushed to him, grabbing his coat sleeve with shaking hands. "John, please, I didn't know where else to go. I made a mistake." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at her, the woman he had once loved so desperately, now ragged and hollow, her bright ambition burned to ash. Sophia started to sob, words tumbling out. How Marcus had lied, how he had used her, how he had left her nothing but debts and humiliation. How everyone had turned on her, how she was alone. And how she wanted to come back. To start over. "Please. I need you," she whispered. "You're the only person who ever really cared. Who ever stayed." John felt the weight of years pressing on his ribs, the echo of every night he spent praying she'd choose him, begging in the silence of his own mind for her to see him. But now he saw her clearly. He stepped back, just enough to let her hand slip from his coat. "You should leave," he said softly, his voice trembling not from weakness but from the sheer force of holding back the old pain that threatened to swallow him whole. Sophia froze, eyes wide, mouth hanging open. "What?" "I'm not your safety net," he continued, his voice firmer now. "I'm not the man you get to crawl back to when the rest of the world spits you out." She started crying harder, but he didn't flinch, didn't reach out, didn't let himself feel pity. Deborah was standing at the doorway then, silent, watching. And in that moment, John realized that every inch he stepped back from Sophia was an inch he stepped toward the future he actually deserved, a life built not on desperate hoping, but on mutual respect and quiet, steady love. Sophia pleaded again, her voice hoarse and cracking, but John simply turned away, walked up the steps to Deborah, and closed the door gently behind him. And for the first time since Sophia left, he felt a strange calm settle in his chest, a fragile peace, but real. Because the woman who had once been his sun was nothing but a fading light now, and he was done burning for her. John thought seeing Sophia again would hurt more than it did, but as the days passed, her desperate calls and texts went unanswered, her shadow lingering only briefly at the edge of his new life before fading like smoke. He buried himself in work, in building something real with Deborah, in small steps toward a future that no longer revolved around Sophia's whims. But the past wasn't done with him yet. It was late evening when Deborah came home, her face pale, a trembling stack of papers clutched in her hand. She dropped them onto the kitchen table without a word, her eyes brimming with something John couldn't read. "What is it?" he asked softly, stepping closer. Deborah swallowed, pointing to the top sheet. I didn't know how to tell you. Sophia, she's suing you. She wants half of everything you have here. Claims you're still legally bound to her. That you abandoned the marriage and took marital assets with you." John felt the floor drop away under him. "What?" he breathed. Deborah's voice cracked. She went to the embassy, claimed you were trying to hide money abroad. That you left her in financial ruin after you built this business here." He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the counter. His heart slammed painfully against his ribs, old wounds splitting open under the weight of Sophia's betrayal. "John, there's more," Deborah whispered, pulling out her phone. She handed it to him with shaking hands. "I didn't want to show you at first, but you need to see this." It was a video, posted on social media by one of Sophia's old friends. In it, Sophia sat at a crowded bar, her hair glossy, lips painted a bright red, her smile cold and sharp. "Of course he abandoned me," she was saying to a small crowd, her voice mocking and edged with bitterness. "Men like that, they never have the stomach to stay when things get real. He left me with the debts while he ran off with that plain little side piece. Deborah, I think that's her name?" Someone off camera laughed, and Sophia raised her glass, a wicked glint in her eyes. "Let him think he's happy. He'll never have what Marcus had. Never. I'll ruin him before I let him enjoy a single day with her." John's hands clenched so hard, the phone screen cracked. He could barely breathe, rage pulsing hot through his veins. Every moment he'd spent mourning her, every tear he'd swallowed in the dead of night, every scrap of himself he'd given willingly, she'd twisted them all into weapons. Deborah stepped closer, resting a tentative hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I tried to keep this from you, but she started showing up at my work too, threatening me, telling me to leave you." A red haze filled his vision. "She's going to destroy everything," he said hoarsely. "She won't stop until she takes it all." Deborah's voice broke. "What do we do?" For a long moment, John said nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted his head, the emptiness in his eyes hardening into something cold and unyielding. "We fight back," he whispered. The next few days blurred into a haze of lawyers, paperwork and tense, whispered conversations. John dug up every email, every document, every scrap of proof that Sophia had willingly abandoned him. He reached out to old friends, piecing together a trail of her new relationship with Marcus, uncovering shell companies, forged signatures, bank transfers that led back to Sophia's private accounts. And in the middle of the chaos, he discovered something else. Late one night, as he dug through old records, he found an email Sophia had sent to Marcus months before she left. In it, she detailed how she was slowly draining joint accounts, shifting small amounts to private holdings, setting the stage to blame John for financial misconduct when she finally left him. By the time he notices, the email read, "He'll be too broken to fight back. He always was so pathetic." John read the words again and again, his breath coming in shallow, trembling bursts. It hadn't just been betrayal, it had been calculated, planned. Every gentle smile, every soft touch in those final months, Sophia had been sharpening the knife behind his back the entire time. And the worst part, the part that made bile rise in his throat, was the timestamp on the email, the night they'd made love after one of her company galas, when she'd whispered tearfully about how tired she was, how scared she was of losing everything, how she needed him. He stumbled from the desk, his legs giving out as he collapsed against the wall. His mind flashed through that night, the way she had kissed him with trembling hands, how he'd held her so close he could barely breathe, whispering reassurances into her hair as she sobbed against his chest. It had all been a lie. Deborah found him there hours later, his body curled tight, shaking with silent, unspent rage. She knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms, whispering soft words he barely heard. When the sun rose, John was done mourning. He filed a counterclaim, accusing Sophia of financial fraud, presenting her own emails as evidence. He froze her assets, blocked her lawyers' attempts to seize anything from his business, and launched a public statement laying out her deceit. The backlash was immediate. Sophia's carefully curated image of the heartbroken, abandoned wife shattered under the weight of cold facts. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting every lie, every suspicious transfer. Her former friends deserted her. Her company board quietly forced her out, fearing scandal and loss of investor confidence. But even as her world burned, Sophia tried one last time. She showed up at John's office unannounced, her makeup flawless, her voice shaking as she whispered, "We can fix this. I went too far, but we can still make it work. We always belong together." John stood behind his desk, the same one he had bought with his first real paycheck in this new life. He stared at the woman he had once loved more than life itself, and for the first time, he felt absolutely nothing. "You burned every bridge," he said quietly. "You cut out my heart and sold it for profit. There's nothing left here for you." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his voice steady. "This ends now. You don't get to touch my life anymore." Her eyes flashed, cold and hateful. "You'll regret this," she hissed, But he only turned away, his voice low and final. "No, you will." And as she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, John let out a slow breath. Deborah slipped in moments later, her hand warm on his back. He looked at her, really looked, and felt something fragile and real flicker awake in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled gently. "We're in this together." And for the first time in what felt like years, he believed it. John watched the sun dip below the skyline, the city glowing gold and crimson as he leaned against the balcony railing of his new office. Below, the traffic hummed on, oblivious to the war he had fought and won. He breathed in deeply, letting the evening air fill his lungs, feeling for the first time that the weight pressing on his chest all these years was finally, truly gone. Sophia was finished. It had taken months of painstaking legal battles, endless negotiations, and countless nights where he wondered if he was doing the right thing, if revenge would really bring peace. But now, as the final court ruling had landed in his favor that morning, he knew he had made the right choice. Sophia's claims had been declared fraudulent, her assets seized to pay restitution for the damages she had caused, and the last lingering claws she had dug into his life had been ripped out at the root. She would be paying back what she stole from him for years, working under the watchful eye of auditors and lawyers, her glamorous reputation reduced to a footnote in the city's tabloids. The friends who once toasted her brilliance now pretended not to know her name, and Marcus, long vanished into the arms of another victim, was the ghost she now chased, alone and humiliated. John hadn't gloated when the final ruling came in, he had only sat quietly in the courtroom, Deborah's hand wrapped tightly around his own, while Sophia's lawyer stuttered through his hollow closing arguments. Sophia herself had been pale and silent, unable to meet his eyes, her hands shaking as the judge read the verdict. When the session ended, she tried to speak to him, her voice ragged and broken. "John, please, we can talk, can't we? I never meant for it to go this far." He had turned to her, his face calm and composed. "I don't hate you anymore," he said softly, "but I don't forgive you either. This is what you chose." He had walked past her then, leaving her standing alone in the corridor, surrounded by reporters snapping pictures she tried in vain to hide from. That night, he sat across from Deborah at a quiet rooftop bar, the city sprawling out behind her in lights and soft music. They said little, simply sharing a drink and watching the stars blink to life overhead. But every now and then, Deborah would glance at him, her eyes shining with something warm and steady, and he would feel that quiet anchor inside him settle even deeper. "Do you feel free now?" she asked finally, her voice gentle as the breeze. John thought about it, about the nights he'd spent staring at the ceiling haunted by Sophia's ghost, the way he had once flinched at every phone call, terrified it would be another threat, another dagger into the life he was building. "Yes," he whispered. "For the first time in years. I think I actually do." Deborah reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I'm glad," she murmured, "because you deserve so much better." He swallowed thickly, overwhelmed by the simple truth of her words. Deborah had seen him at his worst, grieving, broken, haunted by Sophia's manipulations. She had stood by him quietly, never demanding more than he could give, never rushing the healing. She had fought beside him, weathered the ugly days when it felt like the world was crumbling all over again, and through it all, she had asked for nothing except the chance to stand by his side. He looked at her now, really looked, and saw not the shadow of Sophia or the remnant of his old pain, but the woman Walwys. Ho had helped him build something new from the ashes. "You saved me," he said quietly. Deborah shook her head, smiling softly. "You saved yourself," she whispered. "I just waited until you were ready to breathe again." A small laugh escaped him, wet and shaky. "Either way, thank you." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. That night, John walked her home, the city lights blurring softly around them. When they reached her door, he leaned in and kissed her, slow, deep and unhurried. It wasn't a desperate kiss fueled by pain or loss. It was something solid and real, rooted in the fragile new life they were building together. She pulled back with a small smile, breathless. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Yes," he murmured, brushing his lips against her hair. "I'm done looking back." They spent the night together, and in the pale dawn light, John watched her sleeping form and felt a quiet surge of hope he hadn't dared to feel in years. A week later, he signed the final document dissolving the last of the shared assets between him and Sophia. As part of the settlement, he had taken control of several properties she had once bought under his name, assets she had tried to hide in secret shell companies. He sold them all, using the money to expand his charity efforts abroad, quietly funding medical programs for communities often forgotten by the powerful. Sophia tried once more to reach him, sending long, rambling emails filled with apologies, half-baked explanations, and desperate pleas. He never responded. He read them once, deleted them, and blocked her address. One day, standing in the shade of a dusty village clinic where children laughed in the halls, he realized he couldn't even remember the sound of her voice anymore. And in that moment, he knew he was free. Months later, he and Deborah returned to the city, hand in hand, ready to start again on their own terms. They didn't rush, they didn't chase headlines, they simply moved forward, step by step, until the shadows of the past lay so far behind them, they felt like someone else's nightmare. And though John never forgot what Sophia had done, he stopped letting it poison him. In the end, the best revenge wasn't public humiliation or tearing her life to pieces. She had done that to herself with her own greed and malice. The best revenge was living so well, so fully, that she faded into irrelevance. As he stood on that balcony one last time, Deborah's arm wrapped around his waist, he whispered softly into the wind, "Goodbye." Then he turned away from the past and walked into the bright, beckoning future, one built not on betrayal but on something real, something he'd earned through every scar and every tear. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look back.